Welcome to IQHitList. I'm Vishwa Sadashivan. IQHitList is Inconvenient Questions one-on-one interview that explores the views of an individual that you want to see. Now, my guest today is the very image of the soft-spoken university don. You could call him an erudite gentleman. Yet this wordsmith, crafter of poems and a guru on creativity, confesses to being an inconvenience. He's such a bloody nice guy that he makes you feel guilty if you don't reflect on why he's saying with inimitable politeness that you are being idiotic. I have with me here one of the leading lights and advocate of local literature. He's Associate Professor of Literature at the Singapore Management University, or SMU. He's also the Director of the Wikimbi Center at SMU, which aims to promote deeper understanding of the impact of cultural diversity on the business environment. In the next 20 minutes, we are going to go into his inner recesses, with his permission, of course. Kirpal.
Yes.
You know, I remember you telling me some time back that you would have been an accidental Public Service Commission scholar.
Right.
But certain things happened in the interview when you went for the PSC interview.
Right.
When you were 18 years old.
Yeah.
And you ended up being a regular guy.
Right.
Now, by the way, when I say scholar, I don't mean a person with scholastic abilities, which
Right.
you are.
Right.
In Singapore, as you know, when you say scholar, it means you're a recipient of a scholarship.
Right.
Right. So, can you share with us what happened?
So the year is 1969, and A-level result has just come out, and we were already actually in the university. And the PSC calls me up because I think my A-level English results were interesting, and so they wanted to see. No, okay, yeah. And so I came from a sort of very poor background and needed a scholarship. And PSC calls me up and tells me that they're very happy, willing to give me the scholarship, but there were two subjects that I was also reading that they wanted me to drop, i.e. philosophy and sociology. Because some months before, Mr. Lee Kuan Yew had a very dramatic encounter with a couple of profs from these two departments at the University of Singapore. And he then said that subjects like philosophy, sociology, and political science were impediments to real progress and the modernization of Singapore. Because these subjects, raise issues of value. And so he said...
And inconvenient.
Inconvenience. But incidentally, he didn't mention English, which I thought was the one department which actually dealt with values in very interesting ways. But he left that be, maybe because Maurice Baker, his good friend, was the head of department.
Yes.
But so the PSC chairman who was interviewing said, are you prepared to drop sociology and philosophy? I said, no. And I added, I think, quite, looking back, I think it was a bit arrogant.
Impetuous.
Impetuous. Yeah. But I added that, gentlemen, I didn't, enroll in a university to be dictated as to what subjects I ought to study. I'm applying for an English scholarship. I promise I'll do honors in English. But on the side, I should be allowed to do what I want to do. And he said, is that your sort of view? And I said, yes. And he said, then thank you, Mr. Singh. So that was it.
And that's it.
Quick exit, yeah. But interestingly, as soon as I reached University of Singapore, Bukit Timah those days, right, on 170.
Public Service Commission was at City Hall.
City Hall, okay. That's right.
Maurice Baker, Art Gallery.
Art Gallery. Yeah. Prof. Bakers were waiting for me. And he said, laugh. So I see that you told the PSC off, did you?
By the time you reached the university.
Yeah. Chairman had already
And there were no handphones then, of course, in 69.
That's right.
Wow.
Yeah.
Good news travels very fast.
Very fast, yeah.
So that's how you started off.
Yeah.
Right.
And so Prof. Baker had to pay my university fees.
Oh, he did?
He did, yeah.
What a wonderful
He's a wonderful gentleman, Prof. Baker.
So tell me, that particular experience you had, at the ripe old age of 18, right? What's the impression that it must have left in you, with you?
Well, I mean that beggars shouldn't be choosers. Can't be choosers. That everything comes with a price. And so I paid that price. So for 4 long years I had to...
Do you regret it?
No.
No.
No, I don't think
Why?
so. I think I stood my ground. There was another occasion in 1972 when I was invited to represent Singapore at the World Youth Assembly taking place in Mexico City. And so I went. And Maurice Baker was still head, and he took me aside and he said, "You sure you want to do this, Kirpal? Because you're sacrificing your first class honors." And I did. So, but I suppose I don't know whether I should take comfort in this, but no one else got the first class either that year.
That year?
Yeah.
Because you weren't there?
Well, but he had warned me about this. But the point is that I thought that the 1 month journey to Mexico would be more interesting than even a first class.
Yeah.
You know, the learning, and until today, I mean, it was such an experience. For 10 days, we were in Mexico City, and it was really tremendous. Being there, the connections, the learning experiences, yeah, very, very...
How do you think your life would have been different had you not gone to Mexico and stayed on and perhaps got your first class? How do you think, your life would have been different?
Right, but you know, in those days, to get a first class in English was really quite an achievement.
Yeah.
They gave a first class once every 10 years or so.
For English literature?
In literature, yeah. The English then meant literature, right? And so the last person to have received then was Li Zupeng, our poet, right? And she was in the department as a faculty member. And Max LeBlanc and I had already been earmarked, I think, by Maurice Baker and Tambu to be also members of the faculty.
Okay.
And I was sort of seen to be a possible first, right? But I had to work harder. But instead of which I chose to, you know, sort of go to this Mexican thing. And yeah, so I ended up still being top, but second class upper. And I think the standards those days were very, very high, very rigorous, given what happened about 10 or 15 years later, when students began to become more, I suppose, vociferous in terms of like, why is it that it's so blooming difficult to get a first in literature? So people, you know, got scared and they stay away from the subject. Same in Singapore today. I mean, the qualitative assessment type subjects don't get the same kind of, you know, enrollments as the quantitative type.
Yes.
Yeah.
In fact, one of the things that bothers me until today is the description of subjects such as literature, obviously philosophy and sociology, as soft options.
Yeah.
I'm sure you've heard that too.
Yeah.
Right. In fact, in various meetings I've attended, you know, people have said, you know, the problem with many of our students today is that they're taking the soft options by doing literature and arts, you know, and I find that very disturbing.
Yeah.
Because clearly they are putting a higher premium on engineering, law, and science subjects, for example. You know, what do you think would be the consequence if this doesn't change, if this attitude doesn't change?
Well, 2 points. One is it's ironic. That's called soft options. Because the thing that Singapore most lacks, I think, is a good grounding in soft skills. But these are precisely the kind of subject that actually ground you in soft skills, so that you become more accomplished, you become a better conversationalist. I should tell you a story. In SMU, we graduate students who are very, very good in finance, marketing, and all of that. And one day I had a call from one of the senior guys in Goldman Sachs about 12 years ago. And he said that one of the things they look out for promotions to senior VP. So up to VP, you can more or less get there. And many of our students do, graduates. But with SVP, it's a global thing.
Right.
And there, the conversations over breakfast and lunch and dinner are not about more numbers and all of that. They're about like, what's the latest concert you've been to? Or, you know, whose art exhibition have you been looking at? And Singaporeans are notoriously bad at these things. And he was telling me the example of a Malaysian guy who got the job, who said, when asked about symphonies and all that, he said, I don't know about all these symphonies, but I said, I know about the MSO, the Malaysian Symphony Orchestra. And then he said, the Goldman guy was telling me, he said next 10 minutes was all his, you know, conversation. He hijacked the whole thing, and that was what he wanted. The team was looking for guys who could engage in an interesting way and carry on a good, interesting, lively conversation. So I think the long-term consequences of not having the soft skills, the capacity to engage at many different levels with anybody, think on your feet, think creatively, imaginatively, with some kind of panache, wit, and all of that, that I think, comes with really a good, solid knowledge of the liberal arts, broadly speaking.
What about analysis? I mean, right now, for
Yeah.
example, I mean,
Yeah.
you know, you deal with innovation a lot,
Sure, yeah.
right? Creative thinking,
Yeah.
out-of-box thinking,
Yeah.
and you train people
Yeah.
to think and analyze,
Yeah.
right? But your education has really been in literature to
Yeah.
a large extent, right?
Yeah.
Your discipline and your
Yeah.
domain knowledge.
Yeah.
So how do you actually translate your domain knowledge in literature to analytics and innovation? And I gather that you are invited to universities like MIT on
Yeah.
a regular basis
Yeah.
to talk about future planning
Yeah,
and future thinking.
yeah.
You know, so how do you draw the connection? Because most of the time when you talk about analysis or analytics,
Yeah.
you think numerical,
Right,
right?
right.
Which is not exactly what literature is.
Yeah, but I think a good training in literature makes you very, very sensitive to words, the power of language. And part of the problem, I think, that our nation faces, and we can come to what I think the probably different pathways that should be adopted more rigorously by our MOE. Part of the thing is that when you're sensitive to words, you don't just read the words on the page, you read the meanings of the words between the words, and more importantly, beyond the words. So here's a very simple example, right? So 2 years ago, I did a little jingle. You know, the internet thing was roses are red, violets are blue, and then you continue, all right? Roses are red, violets are blue. So I wrote, roses are red, violets are blue, everybody is happy, and Singaporeans too, right? With a question mark. So a friend who had been reading this and who is, a senior guy in our civil service, rang me and said, Kirpal, you don't blooming learn, You're still criticizing us. Nothing seems to make you happy. Even at this age, you're old man, you're past 60, You're still carrying on. And I said, what's the matter? What happened? He said, this latest thing that you're writing. I said, oh, you mean the violets are blue thing? He said, yeah. I said, yeah, I thought some people would misunderstand. And I said, I put a question mark. It's a grammatical, thing. It was an exercise in grammar to show people how important a punctuation mark is. I said, if I had put a full stop and everybody is happy and Singaporeans too, you would be praising me, probably give me the highest national award you can, possibly find. But because I put a question mark, you're upset.
Yeah.
So I think that kind of being sensitive to even a punctuation mark is very, very fundamental. And literature does that. I mean,
so how do you feel about more and more schools, I feel, in Singapore, actually dropping literature as an examinable subject?
because it is not a soft option. It is actually blooming difficult to score a distinction in literature. You know what I mean? It's very, very difficult. And people like Maurice Baker, Edwin Tambul, the old school teachers, always used to say, the moment we accept you as an English major, we assume that your grammar is impeccable, your vocabulary is absolutely impressive, and your turn of phrase, dramatic, cheeky, witty, inviting, engaging. These were taken for granted. But
Just
today,
hygiene factors.
absolutely there. But today, we don't have that.
Yeah.
Which means that in the longer term, if we cannot appreciate the language which is universal, I think Mr. Lee Kuan Yew was right for whatever reason that, and he was very far thinking that Singapore's superiority, both within the region and beyond the region, rested in the fact that we could have individuals who had the capacity to communicate in English at multi-levels of engagement.
In fact, it's interesting because I had a conversation a couple of years back with the head of government of a neighboring country.
Right.
And I asked him what he thought of Singaporeans, and he was wit personified.
Right.
And his comment was very simple, straight, with a smile. He said, Singaporeans can count,
Yeah.
but they can't engage.
That's right.
And you see, there's so much in that, in
Of
the
course.
two lines. Singaporeans can count, but they can't engage.
Correct.
The ability to engage, the ability to persuade, actually is a function of the language. Not by language, we're not just talking about words, right?
Right.
We're talking about the ideas that you communicate, right? So apart from language as in words, does literature also deepen your understanding of ideas?
Absolutely.
You know, generating fresh ideas,
Absolutely.
original ideas,
Absolutely.
and creating guts.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Do you think that's missing?
It's very, very interesting. So if you take the opening line of Li Zupeng's poem,
Yeah.
My Country and My People,
Yes.
she begins by saying, my country and my people are neither here nor there, nor in the comfort of my preferences, if I could even choose. Now just look at the 4 lines, right?
Yeah.
And the number of ideas for nation building that are embedded in these 4 lines. And if our politicians, if our thought leaders paid attention just to these 4 lines, they could come up with so many different scenarios. So that the future scenarios unit in the PM's office, I think would be really,
Really, would be so much richer for it.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So maybe, I mean, we've got about 5 minutes left. I just want to wrap by taking the conversation back to when you were 18.
Right.
You had said that Lee Kuan Yew was not very comfortable with too many people taking, especially scholars, taking subjects such as sociology, philosophy, and political science.
Right.
Obviously, because it will become inconvenient.
Right.
Right. Do you think that mindset still exists? That if we have too many people who are schooled in these subjects, including literature, right, you may actually find life a lot more, policymakers may find life a lot more inconvenient because you'll have a lot more people with the facility of the language, the ability to engage, and generating original ideas with courage.
Right. You know, Lee Kuan Yew used to use the phrase guts and gumption so often, right?
Yes.
Without the inconvenience, there can hardly be guts and gumption, because there's no need for guts and gumption if there's nothing inconvenient. So I think some of our leaders may be mistaken, thinking that inconvenience really is literally inconvenient and is a waste of time. I think inconvenience is a challenge. And the more challenge a person has, I think the more stimulated, the more robust he's going to be. You know, the late Mr. Lee was incredible. I remember my last conversation with him. I had a few opportunities to have good conversations with him. He said to me, as I entered his office at the Istana, first thing he wagged his finger and said, no Singlish. Because he knew that I defended Singlish, right? The nature of that whole meeting was premised upon a very simple question. He looked at me and he said, tell me, since you are the English expert, what kind of a nation makes for better patriotic behavior? A monolingual nation, or a bilingual nation, or a multilingual nation? And I looked at him and I said, sir, with all due respect, a monolingual nation. He looked at me and said, so you're saying I'm wrong? I said, sir, but this is really a considered point. He said, give me an example. So I gave Japan, patriotic behavior, even America, right? Until the new Spanish guys are coming in. So he said, what about Singapore? I said, it's a real challenge. Because if the mindset is multilingual, patriotic demands a kind of total commitment that sometimes doesn't allow too much analysis. And therefore the one-sided thing leads in a curious, sad but definite way towards making the person who is monolingual very, very dogmatic, proud, and therefore very willing to sacrifice his all to preserve that. Whereas a multilingual nation, take like Switzerland and all that, they become good brokers. And I say, if Singapore wants to be a broker, then we can go bilingual and all that. Then he said, I need time to rest. So he said, he took 45 minutes to go and have a rest, leaving me in his office. Which was really wonderful. I mean, no other person that I can think of has ever raised that beautiful question. What makes for better patriotic behavior in terms of language?
Yes.
Whether it's multi or mono.
You were not at the same time advocating that that's the right way. You were just saying that it will lead to greater patriotism.
That's right. I was just trying to say the fact.
The fact. Well, as a closing, what would be an inconvenient question that you would ask our viewers?
Why are not more parents really urging the Ministry of Education to bring back literature at least up to the O levels, or maybe even now to the A levels. Because without literature, a nation's history, a nation's capacity to look at itself in an honest kind of way, but without always violating those, things that are sacrosanct, because literature allows you the metaphoric shift to be able to perceive, to be able to comment, to be able to observe, to critique. That, I think, is the most inconvenient question. I really am very, very, I like to think, I'm going to be 67 very soon. Having seen literature, I've never left the university, right? You asked me about regret just now. My wife thinks that I would have made a fairly okay ambassador because the MFA also were looking for people in the early days, right? And Max too, Max LeBlanc, my good buddy. I think the Ministry of Education is perhaps taking a short-term view of immediate results rather than a longer-term view. And I think more and more of our young are becoming restless, quite bored, because, as Einstein said, the things that can be counted don't really count.
Yes.
And those that count cannot be counted. So a quantitative approach to life, no matter how many billions you accumulate, at the end the human heart yearns for something deeper, something richer, something more meaningful. And that is something that the dollar sign can never buy.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Kirpal.
Thank you, Vishwa.
And since you talk about Einstein,
Yeah.
another of my favorite quotes from Albert Einstein comes to mind
Right.
when I listen to you.
Right.
Great spirits have always encountered violent opposition from mediocre minds. And you're obviously not a mediocre
Well,
mind.
I don't know, but thank you very much.
Don't allow that to happen.
No, thank you so much.
Thank you very
Thank
much,
you,
my
Vishwa.
friend.
Very proud of you.
That's
Thanks, yeah.
Kirpal Singh, absolutely inimitable, passionate, and yet warm and friendly. Tough combination. This has been IQ Hit List with Dr. Kirpal Singh from the SMU. Well, log into our website, www.iq.sg, to watch out for our next IQ Hit List. Click the links to see other guests who have appeared on our previous episodes. Post your comments on social media and let us know if there's someone you would like us to interview on Hit List.